So today we will talk about the India and United Arab Emirates Agreement, basically known as the Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, and that is the more comprehensive than the Free Trade Agreement has been signed between the India and UAE recently. What is the main aim? If you talk about, the main aim is basically to increase the trade at least around $100 billion by 2030 is the main of India UAE agreement. So remember that. Let's talk about the India UAE agreement, and in this video we are going to discuss why in news, what is the main aim, what is the main significance, and what is the actually parts or what is the product actually included and product which is actually excluded. So these are the four areas which we are going to cover in this video. So let's talk about. So if you talk about, as I have already told you, that why in news, India and United Arab Emirates, remember that it is a United Arab Emirates, have signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement. Remember that, popularly known as CEPA, comprehensive economic partnership agreement. There can be a question in any of the examination that India recently signed a comprehensive economic partnership with which one of the following countries. Then remember that United Arab Emirates, in short form UAE. So, which is more effective and comprehensive than the free trade agreement? Remember that, because here is the word, look at the comprehensive. It only basically consists of goods, but comprehensive economic partnership agreement not only includes the good and services, but also the other areas like intellectual property right, or if any kind of services, or if there is any medical devices or anything which is more and more comprehensive. Mean talks can take place on anything as compared to free trade agreement, which is quite restrictive, you can say. So remember that. If you talk about what is the main aim, as I have already told you, to increase the bilateral merchandise trade to $100 billion by 2013 between the India and UAE is the main aim. So remember that. If you talk about what is the main significance of the India UAE CEPA agreement, so first of all, as you know, there is a RCPA. So remember that, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and India walked out from the Regional Comprehensive Partnership because of the Chinese fear, and there can be a dumping from China while citing the free trade agreement. So this is the, so what is the message actually went in the world that India is pursuing during the COVID-19, and after the COVID-19 India is going to pursue the protectionist policy. So remember that. But remember that there is a shift after walking out from the RCEP. Remember that India showed that it has not any protectionist policy, but it is only pursuing the bilateral free trade agreement. There is no protectionist policy in the mind of India, but only pursuing the bilateral trade agreement rather than the multilateral trade agreement. So remember that. But there is no decline in the multilateral trade agreement, but actually walked out from the RCEP. So this is a clear message that no, and obviously with the Japan, Australia, the free trade agreement in the pipeline, and although we are also going to sign with the US, but US has declined to sign the free trade agreement. So India is not pursuing the protectionist policy is the first message from this India UAE CEPA agreement. So remember that. If you talk about now the focus on bilateral trade agreement rather than multilateral trade agreement. So remember that now India is fact that it is free from the China's cheaper product. What is the main advantages of China? They actually sell or they actually export the cheaper products, and that's why countries buy those products because of the cheaper. So here is the dumping, main is the dumping issue, or India felt that China can dump anything in India while citing the free trade agreement. So now free from the China's fear. So remember that. If you talk about India UAE CEPA marks the first trade agreement India has made with a major trading partner in over a decade. Means in the last decade, if you talk about from 2012 to 2022. So in the last decade, this is the first country or this is the first agreement signed. If you talk about the last agreement of the free trade agreement signed with the Japan in 2011. So this is the another significance. So if you further talk about the significance, then remember that India could conclude an free trade agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council. So remember that there actually the Gulf Cooperation countries are consist of basically 6 to 7 countries, which includes basically the Bahrain. As you know, actually in around 2019 or 2020, actually Indian Prime Minister visited the Bahrain, or you can say the Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the Saudi Arabia, and we have already signed with the United Arab Emirates. So remember that. So India can sign an agreement at the end of the year with the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So remember that, which consists of Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, if you talk about. So this is another significant. India is also pursuing an FTA agreement with the Australia, United Kingdom, Canada, Israel, and the European Union. So this can be the boost for these countries, and India can handle the situation while doing something. So remember that. And this is agreement with the with the United Arab Emirates is very significant, you can say. Now the question arises, actually what is in the agreement and how it is actually going to benefit India. So remember that if you talk about United Arab Emirates, is set to eliminate duties around 80% of its tariff line, which accounts for 90% of India's export to the UAE. Means if there is a 90% actually products which is going to United Arab Emirates, then there is a 80% reduction of duties will take place on those products. So remember that. And especially it is favor in the textile and the garment sector. How it is favored the textile and the garment sector? Because as you know, there is a Vietnam and Bangladesh is also a textile hub, and when they went to the UAE, there is no tariff. So with the zero tariff, actually this reached to the UAE. So obviously why? So purchasing power of the United Arab Emirates country will be more as compared to the Indian textile and garments, and that's why there is a huge significance in the textile and the garment sector to the India because of the zero reduction or around the 80% of its tariff line. So remember that. So as compared to the Bangladesh and Vietnam, India will be more and more competitive, and at present they are at the disadvantages because of import tariff. So remember that. So further, if you talk about the zero duty access for the Indian products to the United Arab Emirates is set to expand over 5 to 10 years around the 97% of the UAE tariff, and which accounts basically the 99% of India's value. So this is a huge agreement signed between the India and UAE, which is going to benefit the India. So remember that. If you talk about what are the sector actually which is going to benefit and what are actually sectors which is included in the India-UAE CEPA agreement, if you talk about, remember that basically the gems, jewelry, textile, as I've already told you, the leather. So remember that. If you talk about the footwear, export goods, as you know, India is basically is going to, IPL is held in the United Arab Emirates. So there is a sports good. Engineering goods, if you talk about, automobile, there is a huge expansion of automobile if you talk about, and another is the pharmaceutical. As you know, India is known as the capital of pharmaceutical. So this is very important, and these are the sectors which is going to benefit from the India-UAE CEPA agreement. So remember that. If you talk about another, there are the additional 10 lakh jobs will be created through these are the India-UAE agreement. And obviously there are the some sectors which has been excluded, basically which consist of 2 points. Remember that, which is actually at the sharp growth in the domestic production, means in India, which is leading to sharp growth, that has been excluded from the CEPA agreement between the India and UAE. And another which actually comes under the production linked incentive scheme, and there is a sharp growth. So remember that. So exclusion of goods, if you talk about, there is a sensitive list which has been excluded, and which consists of around 10% tariffs between the India and UAE. Remember that, which consists of basically the dairy sector, fruit sector. As you know, India has the advantage of all this production, and that's why India has excluded this product. So dairy products, fruit products, vegetables, cereals, tea, coffee, sugar, food preparation, tobacco, as you know very well, toys, plastic, aluminium and copper. India has excluded all these, and as I have already told you, others are which are at the sharp growth in the domestic market, and actually which comes under the production linked incentives, or government is incentivizing the production of that product, that has been excluded from the India-UAE CEPA agreement. So remember that. So if you talk about the historic India-UAE CEPA agreement, this is the first time actually the digital trade has been included. So remember that this is for the first time that India has included a digital trade in the United Arab Emirates based on the best endeavor and not subject to the dispute settlement mechanism. Means there will be no dispute settlement mechanism, but it is a basically on the talk or bilateral talk. And what is the best endeavor means what is the favors in both the countries. So that will be included in the digital trade. So remember that. If you talk about that will lead to the paperless trading. Remember that trading. If you talk about the consumer protection, unsolicited commercial electronic message, personal data protection, cross border flow of information is very and again important. If you talk about India is hesitant to the cross border flow of information, so this is a signal to the world. So remember that. If you talk about electronic payments as well, electronic payments is penetrating in India as well as in the world. If you talk about recently in the UPI, Unified Payment Interface, has been launched in Nepal. So UPI has been launched. So that is the electronic payments if you talk about. Now there is a cooperation on digital products will take place between the India and UAE CEPA agreement. So this is all about the India and CEPA agreement. If you talk about the summary of this video, then remember that this is a very historic agreement signed between the India and UAE agreement. What is the main aim? Main aim is very important. Basically to reach or to increase the merchandise trade actually is to $100 billion by 2030. So remember that. Remember that there are some parts have been excluded from the India and UAE CA agreement, which include basically the dairies, fisheries, and fruits, vegetable, tobacco, toys, and farm, etc. This is kind of services which has been excluded. And remember that in India and UAE agreement, not only the trade means not only the goods, but also the services has been included, which includes also the digital services or digital trade. So this is very important if you talk about. And there are some significance which is not important from the objective kind of examination, but obviously from the subjective kind of examination is very important. So there is a signal in the India and UAE agreement. India is not following a protectionist policy, and obviously, and this is also going to be happen in the future, because in the UK, European Union, Israel, if you talk about, this is the FTA agreement is actually in the pipeline. And obviously the Gulf Cooperation Council, if you talk about countries, obviously the agreement is in the pipeline, and which could sign by the end of this year. So this is all about of this video. Thank you guys. Hope you like this video. You should subscribe my channel. Thank you so much for watching this video.